Imagine you stand at Rome's edge in AD 1527 with cracked lips and a tongue that still tastes yesterday's cheap wine, sour and metallic like a penny held too long. You feel the shame of that New Year promise. Survive the year, earn the pay, go home, because the promise already sounds like a joke the world tells to men who carry weapons for wages. You see the city ahead like a crown resting on tired hills, holy from a distance, therefore cruel when the wind turns and brings it close. You smell whetstone and horse piss, kitchen smoke and river rot. You hear the clatter of carts on uneven street, the muttering of prayers, the quick bargaining of vendors who pretend a market can still exist when fear walks the alleys. But the fear sits behind the eyes of everyone you pass, therefore even laughter comes out thin, like a blade tapping bone. Imagine pressing your palm to a wall that everyone calls eternal. The stone feels cold and slick, sweating from a season that refuses to decide if it is winter or spring. Your fingers find cracks filled with old dirt, softened mortar, the patient damage of years. You see masons stare at the same cracks and look away, as if looking makes the weakness real. You feel the walls age through your hand, therefore the word eternal tastes like a lie on your teeth. You hear rumors move through straw and taverns like rats. An Imperial army is coming, German landsnecks with pikes and jokes that cut like wire, Spanish veterans with eyes that never stop measuring, Italians caught between loyalties like men caught between two doors. But the rumor carries one sharp detail that never changes. They are unpaid. Therefore they march like they chase a debt with teeth. Scouts return with numbers that do not match. One swears 10,000. Another spits and says 30,000. You don't know which mouth lies, because every report arrives wet and unreliable, a paper soaked through, ink running like blood and water. The fog of war is not poetry here. It sits in the low fields and clings to cloaks. Therefore, even the distance between trees feels like a place an army can hide. Inside the city, the Pope's name, Clement VII, moves through mouths like a prayer and a curse. You see people say it with soft lips, expecting miracles, therefore they look at the sky as if bread can fall from it. You expect rations and powder. You get neither in full. The bread comes hard enough to scrape gums. The powder cakes in the horn because damp air crawls into everything. But duty still demands a straight back, therefore your shoulders carry weight that pay does not match. Dawn approaches and the air changes. You notice it first in your nostrils. The wind carries sweat that is not yours, horses that are not stabled here, smoke that does not rise from Roman kitchens. You hear shouting, closer than it should be, like a quarrel happening right outside a door that everyone swears is locked. But the countryside should hold distance, therefore the closeness feels wrong, a hand under the cloak where a knife waits. The first cannon coughs. It is not a clean crack, it is a sick animal sound, wet and heavy. The wall trembles, and you feel it through your boots, through your knees, into your teeth as if Rome itself flinches. Normal life shatters in that single tremor. People stop pretending. Dogs howl. Somewhere a child starts crying and cannot stop. But there is no time to hunt comfort, therefore you run where your body is told to run, towards stone and smoke and shouting. Imagine the streets narrowing as you move, closing like a throat. You see shutters slam. You see a woman drag a boy by the sleeve so hard his heel skids sparks from stone. You smell fear's sour sweat, mixed with garlic and old oil. But the city cannot swallow everyone, therefore some stand in doorways frozen, as if waiting for the world to explain itself. You reach the defenses where men cluster with tools and weapons, where the talk is rough and fast. You hear arguments about whose turn it is to stand watch, about whether the powder is too damp, about whether the Pope will send more coin. But coin never arrives on time, therefore the words turn bitter, every sentence ending like a spit on the ground. The season drags. Mud sucks at boots. You feel it pull as you step, as if the earth itself refuses to let you move. Powder turns to paste in the corners of pouches. Bread turns to stone, therefore you break it with a knife and chew until your jaw aches. The cold sits in your fingers and makes them clumsy. But clumsy fingers cost lives, therefore you rub them until they burn, trying to wake them with pain. You learn the city's defenses the way you learn a stranger's face in a dark room, by touch. You run your hand along parapets, counting cracks, feeling where age softens strength. You find places where moss grows in seams, therefore water finds the same seams, therefore stone loosens. You see men shove boards into weak spots like plugging holes in a boat. But boards are not stone, therefore the mind keeps returning to the thought of ladders. Pay comes late, food comes thin, and every man hears the same poisonous arithmetic. Unpaid soldiers are not soldiers, they are a crowd with weapons. You see it in the eyes, too bright, too hungry, too quick to laugh at cruelty. But the defenders also wait for pay, therefore the line between protector and predator looks thinner every day, like a rope fraying strand by strand. Rumors stab from every angle. Some say the attackers fight for the Emperor Charles V. Others say they fight for God. Others say they fight for their empty bellies. You don't know which is worse, because all three can burn a city the same. But the rumor that keeps returning is simple. The army is desperate. Therefore the city feels less like a fortress and more like a storehouse waiting to be cracked open. You watch civilians make bargains with fate. You see saints pinned to doors, little painted faces nailed above lintels as if wood can stop steel. You see coins hidden in bread bins, jewelry wrapped in cloth and shoved under loose tiles. You smell fresh earth in courtyards where someone digs fast and shallow, burying a life's savings like a corpse. But hope is a thin blanket, therefore people pull it over themselves and shake anyway. You hear a name whispered with fear. The Duke of Bourbon is with them. The whisper moves like a draft through a rune. Then another whisper follows close, he is dead. You don't know what is true. You only know the army keeps moving. But uncertainty gnaws worse than certainty, therefore your sleep turns light and broken, a handful of minutes at a time. Night after night you listen for the sound that means breach. You begin to hate silence more than shouting, because silence lets imagination climb its own ladders. You see darkness press against the wall like a living thing. You feel your heart jump at the scrape of a boot, the cough of a tired man, the clink of metal. But the hours keep coming, therefore you hold your weapon and wait for dawn like waiting for an execution that might be postponed but never cancelled. Imagine early morning in May, AD 1527. The fog is thick enough to hide sin. It curls along the ground, swallowing ankles, therefore a man 10 paces away becomes a shadow with a breathing sound. The air tastes wet, like licking a cold spoon. You grip your weapon so hard your fingers cramp, because grip is the only certainty left. But certainty does not stop ladders, therefore you listen, hard, for the first hard sound. It arrives, wood slams against stone. The first ladder hits with a sound like a door slammed in your face. Another follows. Another. The rhythm is wrong, too quick, too confident. You feel the wall shiver again as cannon fire thumps somewhere, not always seen, only felt as pressure. But fog hides the guns, therefore every impact feels like it comes from everywhere at once. Gunfire begins as scattered sparks, then becomes a continuous tearing. You smell sulfur and wet cloth. Wet powder misfires. A man beside you curses because his match goes out at the wrong moment. You see him fumble, hands shaking, trying to wake a flame in air that wants to kill it. But the attackers do not need perfect powder to climb, therefore the ladders keep multiplying like insects. You see figures climbing, some slip, some keep coming. Their boots scrape stone. Their breath puffs white. A face appears through the fog, eyes wide, teeth bared. You jab downward until your arms burn. You feel the shock of contact travel up your wrists. But bodies fall and bodies replace them, therefore the wall stops feeling like a wall and starts feeling like a crowded ledge where flesh presses into flesh. The fight turns intimate. You smell sweat, iron, wet wool. You hear the wet slap of a blade finding meat. You feel someone grab at your sleeve from below, fingers like hooks, trying to pull you down into the fog. But falling means being swallowed. Therefore you stomp, kick, strike downward with a fury that is half terror, half stubborn refusal to die on someone else's schedule. A shout rises. Somewhere the attackers surge harder. You see defenders glance sideways, eyes flicking like trapped animals. The fog makes every rumor immediate. Someone yells that the Duke of Bourbon lies dead, shot, fallen, finished. But death does not stop the army, therefore the surge grows wilder, like men released from discipline because the last chain snaps. You hear the sound of pikes moving, a dry wooden hiss. Lanzknechts push forward with bright slashes of color on their sleeves, ridiculous in the fog like carnival cloth at a funeral. Spanish veterans climb with grim economy, faces tight, therefore their silence feels louder than shouting. But different tongues still scream the same wordless hunger, therefore the assault becomes a single animal made of many throats. Wet stone makes footing treacherous. You feel your boot slide, your stomach lurch, your balance go thin. A comrade grabs your belt and hauls you back. You smell his breath, wine and fear. But saving you costs him attention, therefore a blade flashes and his shoulder blooms red, bright at first, then dark as rainwater soaks it. The wall's top becomes chaos. Shields knock. Helmets ring like bells struck by malice. You see a man raise a sword and hesitate because the fog makes friend and enemy look the same at a glance. But hesitation kills faster than steel, therefore his moment of doubt ends with a scream as a pike finds his gut. Somewhere below, bells ring. Not for mass alarms. The sound rolls through fog and stone and hits the chest like a fist. Doors splinter in the distance. Women shout names into streets that do not answer. Horses shriek inside alleys too narrow for them, hoofs sparking, eyes rolling white. But the wall still holds a little, therefore you keep stabbing, keep pushing as if effort alone is mortar. You catch flashes of polished metal deeper in the city. The Swiss Guard forms near the Pope, a red and yellow blade moving with terrible purpose. Their halberds tilt like reeds in a storm, therefore every step looks rehearsed, drilled into bone. You see bright cloth darken as blood spreads. You hear their shouts, sharp and disciplined. But discipline bleeds out like anyone else, therefore each fallen guard becomes a message written in flesh. Time is being bought with lives. The decision arrives without ceremony. Hold the wall where the crush threatens to swallow you, or run toward the Borgo where the Pope's escape route to Castel Sant'Angelo becomes the last thread keeping Rome from total decapitation. You feel the choice in your throat like a knot. You don't know if holding matters. You don't know if running matters. But the city's heart beats in that narrow corridor, therefore your legs move, half by will, half by instinct toward the place where survival and history squeeze through the same gate. You push through smoke and bodies. The streets feel unfamiliar because law loosens its grip in real time. You see men drop their posts and sprint, not as cowards, but as creatures fleeing a fire that eats certainty. You smell pitch and burning cloth. But the fog still clings, therefore you run inside a world that looks like a dream gone rancid, edges soft, violence sharp. The Borgo churns. You hear prayers spoken fast, not for salvation but for immediate outcomes. Let the door hold. Let the bridge stay clear. You see clergy in fine cloth stumble, their hands untrained for running. You see a man clutch a reliquary like it is a shield, knuckles white. But relics do not stop blades, therefore the reliquary becomes just another piece of metal to be ripped away by rough hands. The corridor toward Castel Sant'Angelo tightens with panic. You feel shoulders slam into yours. You smell sweat and urine, the honest stink of fear. A scream erupts when someone falls and gets trampled. But stopping means becoming part of the ground, therefore you step over what the mind refuses to name. You look up and see the fortress ahead, thick and grim, a stone fist by the river. The bridge feels too exposed, therefore every footstep across it feels like walking on a knife's edge. You hear distant cannon, nearer shouting. You don't know if the attackers already pour into the streets behind. But the crowd moves like a river with no banks, therefore you let it carry you, pushing, gasping, swallowing air that tastes like ash. Behind, the line breaks. It does not break politely. It collapses. You feel it as a change in sound. The organized clamor of defense becomes the ragged roar of a flood. You see men with disciplined faces suddenly grin with permission, as if the world hands them a pardon to become wolves. But wolves do not stop at the first bite, therefore Rome begins to become something else, a hostage city, held not by a single plan but by 1,000 appetites. Inside the city, smoke crawls along walls like a living thing searching for oxygen. You smell candle wax melting in hot air, mixed with blood and spilled wine. Celebration turns inside out. A New Year's toast becomes a scream, laughter becomes pleading. You see churches echo with footsteps that are not prayers. But stone halls amplify every sound, therefore each cry feels multiplied, as if the saints themselves shout back. You move through a street where doors hang open like broken mouths. A shop's shelves stand stripped. A table lies overturned, bread scattered, and stepped into mud. You see a man in fine clothes on his knees, hands raised, trying to buy mercy with words. But mercy is not on the list of goods today, therefore the answer arrives as a boot to the ribs, a laugh, a hand rummaging for rings. The air fills with the crackle of small fires. You hear glass shatter. You smell hair burning somewhere close, sharp, and unforgettable. You see a woman clutch a child and press both into a corner where shadow looks like safety. But shadows are not walls, therefore men with weapons find them easily. Guided by cries, by the simple mathematics of terror, people hide where there is nowhere else to go. You don't know who commands now. Orders dissolve into personal survival. You see groups of attackers argue in different tongues over who claims which house, which chest, which hostage. But the argument never lasts, therefore a punch, a knife, a sudden agreement happens when someone offers a bottle or a purse. Hunger is diplomacy now. Rome becomes ransomed. Not conquered cleanly, held. Bargained over. You see citizens clutch relics like passports, holding up crosses and scraps of bone with trembling hands, hoping holiness translates into safety. But holiness does not fill bellies, therefore the relic becomes a bargaining chip, traded for a night without violence, for a door left intact, for a daughter spared. You pass a church where candles still burn, flames steady as if ignorance is possible. You smell incense fighting the stench of sweat and smoke. You hear a whispered prayer that breaks into sobbing. But the sacred space does not protect, therefore boots track mud across the stones, hands tear at cloth, and the altar becomes just another table for robbery. The Swiss guards' sacrifice echoes through rumor more than sight now. You hear people speak of bright uniforms cut down, of halberds snapping, of a small wall of bodies buying the Pope's escape. But you cannot verify anything in the fog of streets, therefore the story becomes a lifeline. If that stand happens, then perhaps something of Rome still holds a spine. You see prisoners herded, men of status, merchants, even clergy, faces bruised, hands bound with rope that bites skin raw. They walk past you with eyes fixed ahead because looking around invites collapse. But captors treat them like walking coin, therefore every step becomes a negotiation in silence. Live if value remains, die if value runs out. The days blur. Hunger becomes a constant ache that turns the world gray at the edges. You feel your stomach twist at the smell of roasting meat because it might be feast or theft or something worse. Water tastes of metal from old pipes and ash from fires. But thirst does not care about ethics, therefore you drink anyway, wiping spit from your mouth with the back of a hand. You learn a brutal truth that no sermon makes gentle. The old order, papal certainty, Renaissance confidence, the idea that Rome sits beyond consequence, cannot stop hunger, debt, and political revenge from climbing a ladder. You see how quickly eternal turns into exposed when payroll fails and leadership hesitates. But people still cling to the idea of permanence. Therefore, they keep saying Rome cannot fall even while stepping over broken icons. You catch glimpses of the attackers' faces when helmets come off. Some look young, cheeks hollow, eyes fever bright. Others look old, scarred, tired of being used by distant powers. You hear them speak of pay, of betrayal, of God's justice, each excuse sharpened to a point. But excuses do not change outcomes, therefore the city suffers the same under every banner. At night, the city sounds wrong. Dogs stop barking because even dogs learn silence. You hear occasional laughter, drunk, cruel, therefore it lands harder than screams because it suggests enjoyment. Somewhere a lute plays a crooked tune, strings out of tune, as if someone tries to pretend this is mere carnival. But pretending requires safety, therefore the music breaks off abruptly when a shout interrupts it. You walk past a house where a family once hides jewelry under tiles. The tiles now lie pried up and scattered. You smell damp dust. You see a small hole in the earth where hands dig too late. But greed arrives faster than hope, therefore the hole becomes a symbol. Preparation does not always outrun a storm when the storm is made of men with nothing to lose. You don't get a neat ending. You get survival math. You count hours by the times you avoid a patrol, the times you find a crust of bread, the times you keep your weapon close enough to touch and sleep. But sleep never comes deep, therefore dreams fill with ladders scraping stone and fog swallowing faces. Eventually, the shock settles into a grim understanding. This is not a single day of violence. This is a condition. Rome sits like a throat under a hand. You see negotiations happen behind closed doors, heard only as rumors, ransom numbers, promises, threats. But the street does not care about paper agreements. Therefore, each alley remains dangerous. Each knock at a door becomes a test of fate. The verdict arrives not as a proclamation, but as a quiet inventory. You see bodies unclaimed because families fear stepping outside. You smell rotting corners where spring warmth turns death fast. You feel the city's pride collapse into exhaustion. Therefore, even survivors move like shadows of themselves, shoulders rounded, eyes flat. But life persists stubbornly. Therefore, someone still sweeps a doorstep, still lights a candle, still whispers a prayer even when the ceiling above is black with smoke. The cost is counted in things that cannot be replaced. Trust in walls, trust in leaders, trust in the idea that holiness guarantees protection. You feel that loss as a weight heavier than armor because it presses on the mind rather than the shoulders. But the world keeps moving beyond the city. Therefore, a larger shift happens under your feet. Power rearranges, alliances harden, fear becomes policy, while you focus on the next swallow of water. Now the mirror turns toward the present. Imagine a modern building that everyone calls unshakable, an institution, a system, a promise. You see people assume it stands forever because it always stands yesterday. But assuming replaces maintenance, therefore cracks widen unseen. Imagine workers who go unpaid, soldiers or employees or guardians of order. You feel how quickly duty turns into resentment when the stomach empties. But resentment seeks repayment, therefore discipline erodes and the uniform becomes just clothing on a hungry body. Do you see the pattern? Stability is not a monument. It is a payroll, a supply line, a legitimacy people actually believe in. When belief cracks, even eternal cities become hostages, held by whoever is willing to exploit the gap between symbol and reality. But symbols still matter, therefore the moment they fall, the shock travels far beyond the walls, changing how everyone thinks about power. The legacy question does not sit in a library, it sits in your hands right now. Imagine standing on that trembling wall again, fog pressing close, ladders rising, orders unclear. You feel the pull between loyalty and survival. But the choice still arrives, therefore ask it without comfort. When the institution you serve stops feeding its own guardians, do you keep holding the line for the idea of it, or do you become the storm that takes what it is owed?